What's going on? Welcome to season 2 of the Freedom Storytellers Podcast, a podcast where we are sharing stories, testimonies about people's story towards freedom. And I hope that it inspires you to live a life of freedom and joy. And I can't wait for you guys to get into our first episode of season 2. It was a great conversation with my brother Laban Reeves. So let's get to it. Hey everybody, welcome to the Freedom Storytellers Podcast, a place where we have conversations with folks where we ask them a number of questions, but ultimately we're trying to get at what is your freedom story? And today, you guys, I am so excited to introduce you all to a friend of mine, a newer friend this year. Actually, I guess last year, we spent a lot of time together in 2021. This is my brother, Laban Reeves. Laban, I'm going to have you tell them a little bit about yourself, but I know you are the like a church planner. You're the lead pastor of New Generation Community Church. You've been a musical recording artist, a youth developer. I wonder, what haven't you done? I mean, sounds like you've done a lot of things. Is there anything that you want to share? Maybe a little bit about your family. Tell us a little bit about your family situation.
Well, if you want to know about my family situation, any day now we're expecting the baby.
That's
so
right.
There's a slight possibility, as slight as it might be, that during this interview I could get interrupted with my wife telling me, "Hey, I think it's time." Okay,
well,
just
exciting.
FYI.
Yeah.
But this will be child number 5 for us. And you know, our story is a unique one in that when we got married, we were both single parents. So our first 2 kids we had independently of one another. And then these next 3 we had together, and God has done an amazing work in my life and in our lives together, blending our families. And I think just overall, it's, you know, I think that's probably one of the things I'm most proud of is just how God has just kind of, you know, been like the thread through the entire fabric of my life. And even when I wasn't following him, you know, he kind of was putting things together and orchestrating things. And so I'm a podcaster / YouTuber. My wife and I do a podcast on YouTube called The Love in the Middle Show on our channel, which is God in Gotham. And in addition to that, you know, I'm a record producer, not an artist. Well, I do some artistry stuff, but I haven't published anything artistry wise as an artist, not much. And so I'm a record producer, and I worked with, you know, a couple A-list artists. In the past, I'm a father. I'm a dad. You know, I really enjoy being a dad and raising up, you know, the next generation, and willing to have more kids if my wife so desires.
Well, you got one coming.
Yeah, right. And so that's a whole story in itself, you know. And you know, so I think those are the things that I'm most passionate about. I also lead it, like you mentioned. I also lead New Generation Community Church, which is a church replant. I took over New Horizon Church in Harlem, New York, back in 2017. And in 2018, we ended up closing it because God had given me a fresh, new and different vision for the church, which we've been building since 2018. And so we ended up closing the previous church that I had, inherited. We closed it down and are rebuilding what's New Generation Community Church, and really passionate about that work too, and raising up leaders. You know, I'm really passionate about raising up a generation of leaders, people who will follow and trust God by faith and live by faith, and not just do church and not just, you know, go through the motions, but people that are really passionate about God. What are you saying to me? And okay, even if I'm not comfortable, God, I'm still going to follow you.
Amen. Come on, man. That's one of the things that I love about just this podcast and these conversations, that through so many of these interviews, like I feel so blessed because I feel like the Lord just preaches through people's story, and I'm like, come on, let's go, Jesus. So tell us a little bit about what life was like before the Lord stepped in, and I know he was always, you know, orchestrating things, but before you really were, you know, surrendered, and before you found freedom in him, what was a little bit of your journey like then?
Yeah, I would say that I had two phases, 2 main phases. And the first phase was when I first accepted Christ. You know, I was in, you know, 7th grade, and, you know, my family didn't grow up going to church. My grandmother went to church. She went to a small church. I grew up in West Palm Beach, Florida. I was born in Liberia, West Africa. So I grew up
really
in West Palm Beach. I know you're just like, I'm learning more things
yeah,
about
so I mean I feel so
like, where
selfish
did that
in these
come
interviews.
from?
I'm learning so many things. Like, wait a minute. Okay, continue.
But born in Liberia, grew up in West Palm Beach, Florida. And I remember in 7th grade, one day, just one Saturday, my mother's like, we're going to church tomorrow. And I'm like, huh? Like, because I'm used to waking up on Sundays, watching cartoons and playing video games all afternoon. Like, that was my rhythm. And so I'm like, how are you going to interrupt my rhythm? You know? And so we went to church that next day, and, you know, she took us to Sunday school, and then we stayed for the service afterwards. And I just remember, like, the next few weeks, you know, the pastor preaching and just really feeling like, you know, when he gives that, you know, invitation to join the church, and he's, you know, sharing the core of the gospel, how Jesus died for our sins, and how, you know, Jesus invites us into a relationship with him and to be reconciled with God. Like, I just felt this tugging at my soul, like, get up and go, you know, but you know, my mother was like, you know, my mother was in control of everything in our house. And so I'm like, I can't get up and go because I ain't talked to her yet. You know what I mean? Right. It was a battle between Jesus and my mother, you know, for a few weeks. And then one Saturday, my mother, you know, said like, hey, okay, tomorrow we're going to all get up and go and join the church. And I'm like, okay, cool. I can accept Jesus now.
Right. The Lord was talking to us both. All right, good.
Like, I needed my mother's permission. You know? Yeah. But, you know, and you and I both know, like, that's not really how it goes. Like, I could have gone up there, you know, without having ever talked to my mother, because the relationship between me and Jesus. And so over the years, I would eventually learn that. The church that I grew up in back in West Palm Beach, you know, they didn't really have an intentional process of helping those who enter the kingdom of God, you know, become disciples of Jesus. And so I stumbled through the next 14 years, you know, just really trying to find my way in this life. I was a good kid, you know, straight A student. I, you know, enjoyed learning, and, you know, didn't do a lot of things that people would consider risky or whatever when I was in high school. And so I had gotten used to my relationship with Christ being based on my ability to be good, my own self-effort. And then I became an adult, went to Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. Go Boilermakers. We're number 3 in the country in basketball right now. Just want everybody to know that. But I go to Indiana, and, you know, I did pretty good. I was really good through college. And then I think it was like the summer of my junior year, I kind of found myself alone in the room with a woman, and ended up losing my virginity. And from then on, you know, things started to unravel in my life. My ability to be good slowly started to deteriorate. And the very next woman that I would be with ended up being bearing a child. And so I became a single dad through that experience. And I remember right after becoming a single dad, right after her having a baby, and then the relationship didn't work out, you know, we separate. And I remember thinking, like, that next month, you know what? I might as well just do whatever. Like, I already messed up. And that just kind of started a spiral that would last a few years, where I had gotten into, you know, a very promiscuous lifestyle, which eventually led to drugs and alcohol, which I had never drank before. I had never, you know what I mean? It's like, so.
Yeah.
It just
and you're like, what, in your 20s at this point?
Yeah. I mean, I had my son when I was 21. So this is like 21. I think like around my 22nd birthday is when that conversation happened internally. Yeah. And I just believe that the enemy just kind of had been waiting, you know, and I it's funny, I was telling my daughter this week, just how the enemy, he's always kind of got this plan for us. And he waits for us just to, you know, he doesn't, you know, hit us with drugs and alcohol out the back. He doesn't hit us with sex and promiscuity off the bat. He kind of plants certain seeds, and he just waits for us to take the bait.
And he's playing a long game. He plays the long game. Yeah. He's like, okay, I'm just going to give you this a little bit here. Oh, that'll get you moving this way. Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I started taking the bait. And as I took the bait, you know, my life would unravel while it was kind of developing and evolving, right? And the reason why I say that is because it was around that season where I also had been praying to God. And so I had a relationship with the Lord. But like I said, it was through trial and error. Like I didn't have, you know, an older man who, or even a man my age. I didn't have anybody who was walking with me. And so it was just me trying to walk with the Lord without the wisdom of anybody who's come before me, without the wisdom of anybody who's gone down the path. And so a lot of things were trial and error. And so I remember I fasted and prayed a few months after that, you know, because I was working at this job, I was working in corporate America, and I really felt like this passion and I would go beyond passion, because I think a lot of people get caught up in, oh, I'm passionate about this thing, and so this is what I must be doing. And so it wasn't like that. It was more, I felt like I was being pulled, like pulled into music, into going to pursue a path in music. And
in that moment, how bizarre was that for you? Because I know you said you went to Purdue, but like you went to Purdue for, what was it, like electrical engineering?
Yeah.
So like electrical engineering to creative arts, like, was there always a creative art, a musical kind of underpinning to your thing, and that just never manifested into that moment?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And you know, I remember back when I was in 7th or 8th grade, I was in middle school, and I remember taking a right brain, left brain test. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not left brain or right brain, I'm middle brain.
I'm brain.
I'm just brain. and really, that's how I've always seen myself, is that I have a lot of left brain tendencies, and I can't remember which one is creative and which one is more analytical.
Actually, I was hoping you would say it.
But it's okay, because I feel like I really fall in the middle. I have a very strong analytical side, but I also have a very strong creative side. And I knew that back in middle school. And so I remember, like, you know, there were moments where I was like, hey, I feel like, you know, playing a trumpet, right? And I was in 7th or 8th grade. I'm like, I should be in a band. I should be playing a trumpet.
I played the trumpet in band.
Well, I didn't. My mother was like, we don't got no money for that, you know? And so I never played, but it was in me. It was in me, and it wanted to come out. And so you know, there were other things that I did that were creative. But when I got into college, well, even I think it was around senior year of high school, back when the Source magazine was like the thing.
Right.
And like they would call it the Bible of hip hop. And I remember like just kind of flipping through the Source magazine, and I saw this ad for what eventually I learned would be a SP-1200 drum machine. I didn't know what it was. It just looked like something I needed to have. Like I
need this in my life.
I need this in my life. And later I would see it in like music videos. Heather B had a video where, you know, D-Nice was like, I'm like, oh, that's it right there. I didn't even know what it is. And I didn't even know how much it costed or anything. Right. But my freshman year of college, I get to college, and I mean, just this series of events happened in my life where freshman year, you know, I a month being on campus, this fraternity, Phi Beta Sigma, they have this rap contest. And I had been writing lyrics for years. And so I entered this rap contest, and I had performed publicly at like pep rallies in my high school and at talent shows. And so I get into this rap contest and I win. Right? You know, I'm this new guy on campus, and I win this rap contest.
Were you dropping like nerdy bars?
I don't.
No one comes near this electrical engineer.
Not quite that, but I imagine there was some nerdiness in my bars.
Right.
I remember one of my first songs, when I finally eventually got my first drum machine, which was the MPC 2000. Was called Computer Man.
There you go.
So go figure, you know. But
right.
I evolved out of that. But I want to tell the story of how I got that drum machine. It's you know, as I'm on campus, I win this rap contest. One of my peers, this young lady, she says to me, "Hey, like, you should meet my boyfriend." And she's like, you know, he's an underground rapper in Chicago.
You know what I thought you said? She said you should be my boyfriend. I was like, that's random.
That would be super random. Yeah, okay. No, she said you should meet my boyfriend. He's an underground rapper in Chicago, and he's pretty popular. I was like, okay, cool. So she was like, okay, next time he comes, I'm going to introduce you. So he comes down for Thanksgiving break, and because I lived in Florida, I didn't always leave campus during breaks, and so for Thanksgiving, I actually stayed on campus by myself. It was like nobody there. But so he comes through to visit her. And so we hang out and we instantly connect. And it ends up being a guy by the name of Rhymefest, who's from Chicago.
Yeah.
And he's a really big underground rapper. But he plays these beats for me, right? And these beats, now this is gonna sound like this story gonna get really crazy really fast. These beats were from an unknown Kanye West,
right?
A semi-known No ID, who at the time had only produced for really that we knew about was Common Sense, who eventually became Common. And so he comes to my dorm room and he's playing like these beats. I'm like, wow, these beats are amazing. I had just gotten like a small rolling drum machine, and just like rinky dink sounds. Like, and he's like, oh, you need to get one of these things. And he was the one who introduced me to the MPC 3000. I was like, what do they use to make their beats? He's like, oh, they use this thing. It costs like just about that much. It's like $3,000.
Right.
Like, I don't have that kind of money. But the internet had just started to become a thing. And so I went to the computer lab, got on the internet and looked it up. And it just turns out that like a month or two prior, they had just released the MPC 2000, which was half the price. And I had that money. So I buy the MPC 2000, and that's kind of how I got, but it took me all the way back to the Source magazine when I saw the SP 1200. It was just always, I don't know where it came from, but it was in me just to even desire it, not even knowing what it was. And so I get this MPC 2000, and the rest is, I won't say the rest is history, but it kind of was. I barely left my dorm room. And everybody else would go out and party. I might go out and party for a little while. I come back and I'm up like the rest of the night in my dorm room doing beats. Everybody else goes out on spring break, and I'm up, the whole week in my dorm room doing beats, and that just became my thing. It's kind of like Kanye has his rap where he said, imagine doing 5 beats a day for 3 summers. The world like 3 summers. I deserve to do these. It's like I put the work in. Like I really put the work in while everybody else was doing everything else, and had started to develop that craft of music producing and beat making. And so I graduate and I'm working in corporate America, and I just feel like, all my life I've been waiting for this moment where I get my job and get my career. And then I get it and I'm like, I'm not happy.
Right.
I'm not happy.
It wasn't what you were meant to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm making good money. I'm making $57,000 right out of college and traveling the world on a company jet. And it's like, and I tell all these stories on one of my YouTube channels. But I'm telling all, and I'm like, I'm just not happy. I want to leave my job to go do music. And
so wait, where were you at in that moment where you're still single, right?
Still single.
Okay. And you've at this point, you have the one child with, okay. And you're now just graduated, but you've got this passion for music, but now you're in a role of electrical engineering. And now you're like, what am I doing?
Yeah. I would go to work and just be miserable. I mean, just completely, and it wasn't a bad job.
Right.
It just wasn't fulfilling me the way I thought that it would.
Yeah.
And I started to pray, God, like, just get me out of here. God, just get me out of here. And slowly but surely, I would have like local artists, I had been passing my CDs out with my phone number on it. I remember one day I was just in the office in my little cubicle praying, God, just get me out of here. And somebody calls me up like, hey, can we buy a beat from you? So I sell my first beats, like, just while I'm doing this. And then I started to pray like, God, if you just give me away. I remember one morning, because I used to go, man, there's so many stories. I'm trying to like,
hey, that's okay, man.
To what's important. But I used to be, so Rhymefest and I had kind of built, a friendship. And I used to be his hype man. So he would perform all over and, I would be his hype man. And so I remember I would leave. I was living in Cincinnati, Ohio. I would leave and drive 2 hours to Indianapolis, Indiana, where he was living at the time, be his hype man for the night. And on a Thursday night, drive back to work at like 5 a.m. and go straight to work. And I remember just be like, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep up this pace. God, I get home one morning, it's like 7 a.m. I'm headed to work. I'm in the shower. I haven't slept. And I'm like, oh, I probably slept, but it was like, like nodding off while you're driving on the highway. Like,
oh gosh.
I'm like, how did I even make it home?
Yeah, that is.
I'm like, God, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep doing this. In the shower, I'm praying, God, if you give me a way to leave this job with some money, I'll go. God, just give me a way to leave this job with some money and I'll go. and I get to work that day, that morning, and I had forgotten that there was this big company meeting that was happening. So I walk in, everybody's already there. I'm late. And I'm like, okay, the black guy's walking in late, of course. And, and so I'm feeling all these things. But I sit down and the company's announcing that they're offering voluntary separation packages for people who want to volunteer to leave so they don't have to lay anybody off.
Look at God.
So God is like orchestrating, like, okay, yeah, I've been waiting for you to pray for me for this, and I've already made a way.
And so that is so amazing. And I love those testimonies of God making his presence so clear, like undeniable. And I have a question. I was thinking as you were talking, you've been talking about your prayer life and asking God for, his rescue and a lot of. Talk to me though about like, where were you at spiritually during that? Because you at the same time, you're praying, God do this, God do that. What was your life looking like as far as like following and being surrendered and submitted to him?
Yeah, so this was at the front end of me, starting to enter those periods of promiscuity.
Okay.
And so
you're
right
still
after
living far, but you have an understanding of God and you have a history of prayer.
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, I can't really say in depth. I just knew at that moment that was such a big decision in my life.
Okay.
And I knew there was some pastor at some point in time had preached, that you should fast and pray. So I go into this 3-day fast.
See, that sounds crazy to me. That like somebody who's like lost in promiscuity is then.
Well, no, I wasn't lost in promiscuity yet.
Oh,
yeah.
You were just you hadn't gone down that yet.
Yeah, it was brewing in my mind.
Okay.
Starting to open, but I hadn't fully
gotcha.
fully gone down that path.
You're still closer to that place where like God is the direction, and you don't really know how that's lived out, and you haven't been discipled, and now you're still eating the breadcrumbs along the trail of bait that the enemy has left for you.
Yes.
Okay.
While also taking all the breadcrumbs that
right. Double-minded. You're living that. Yeah.
Perfect. That's a perfect way to describe it. I was double-minded.
Yeah.
And I had a desire to follow God, but I didn't know how to protect myself in the process.
Amen. Okay. All right. Continue. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And so I pray and I go on this 3-day fast. And during this fast, I never fasted in my life before. But during this fast, I really feel like the Lord's saying, no, like go, like take the voluntary separation package, which amounts to like around $14,000. And I'm gonna provide, I got you, Yeah. And so I leave my job, and it would be the week of September 11th, 2001. That was my last week of work. And I remember waking up on that Tuesday morning when the towers fell, that I was thinking, what am I doing leaving my job? The world is falling apart outside. Like, God, are you sure that I should?
Is that what you said?
Because the very next week was going to be my first time traveling to New York City to hang out with Kanye. And I didn't even tell about how I ended up being in that position. But Rhymefest, he and I had built this relationship, this friendship, and he was friends with Kanye. And so he eventually would introduce me to Kanye, and we were going to take our first trip to New York after Kanye had just moved to New York, and just kind of hang out,
Right.
And so, and then the towers fall.
Right.
It's like, hey, what am I doing with my life? And it's God really telling me to go. But I had already made the decision, and I had felt that's what God was saying. And so I went. And the next few years would be increasing in promiscuity, but then also increasing simultaneously in my developing my career in the music industry. So within the next calendar year, I would eventually meet the brother of Foxy Brown, who was one of the top female rappers at the time, and one of the first female rappers who's kind of probably had a few different milestones. I would meet her brother, and give him a CD with my tracks on it. Name drop that I was friends with Kanye, because Kanye wasn't famous at the time, but he had produced for Foxy Brown prior, and so there was familiarity there. He listened to my beats. And her brother's name was young Gavin. Gavin calls me back a couple of days later, and a couple months later, they had recorded a song to one of my tracks, and it was on the radio, and Hot 97 in New York City, And Master Flex is dropping bombs on the record, you know?
Nice.
And so things were just happening.
Yeah.
And you know, God was gracious to me. God gave me immense favor during that season. I would go on to produce records for Fabulous. That was a song, you know, I did for him called Respect on his Street Dreams album, which was a really big album for him. Mm-hmm. It was a platinum album. So that's when you know, see platinum producer. Right. But I was on an album that became platinum. And so, you know, 1 million people heard my track, you know? And yeah, it's wild. And those things kept happening until eventually I would get a call one day from Kanye. And Kanye was like, yo, you know, your song, the song that was with Foxy Brown, it was played on the radio all the time out here in New York. And he was like, have you ever thought about moving to New York? And I'm like, no. He was like, well, you probably should think about moving to New York, because if you're not out here, you know, the way the industry works is people don't know who you are, then somebody else is going to take your credit.
Right.
And I think probably what was underneath that, I think he was probably trying to say, somebody else told me that they did your record. He never said those words, but he framed it in that way. And so I began praying, like, okay, how do I move to New York? And I think within a month of that conversation, I get a royalty check in the mail that was like $18,000. I was like, oh, I guess this is it.
You're like, I'm moving to New York.
And so I prayed to God, and I really felt God saying to go. And I think if I remember correctly, I think I felt him saying go before getting that check.
And the check was just confirmation.
The check was just confirmation. And I packed my son up in a U-Haul truck. He was 5 years old at the time. And we drove across the country from Indiana to New York City. And I moved here. And within a calendar year of landing in New York and getting my first apartment here, I was homeless.
And with a child. So I think the part that maybe might not have been highlighted in here. So you were raising your son, and was he dual living with you and with mom, or just with you? Were you sole custody, or?
No, we did have joint custody, and that's a whole nother testimony in itself. But eventually God would give me full custody. So I had full custody, and she would see him on holidays and on holidays at that point in time, because you know, we were so far apart physically. So and so me and my son here in New York City, you know, and then the money dries up because I didn't have good spending habits. And you know, I had calculated that within the next calendar year of landing in New York, there were verbal confirmations for at least $30,000 of work. I mean, the phone calls were coming in. Rhymefest had just gotten a record deal. And so on the low end, at least I would make $30,000 in the next year.
Right.
And I made 1/10 of that.
Oh, wow.
That entire calendar year. So I only made $3,000. And God used that experience. He evicted me from my apartment. I got evicted from my apartment, but my sister and her husband had just moved to New York City also at the same time. So God had already provided, had made provision for me to have housing. So I moved in with them, with my son. And so God was always at work. And the only thing that I knew to do in that season of my life was, I think I need to find a church.
Come on.
I think I need to find a church. And so this random thing happens where while my sister, she comes to pick me up on a Sunday morning to help me move my stuff out of my apartment into her apartment. And she tells me about this church that she found out about on a business trip to Washington, D.C. with somebody some lady on the elevator. And so I'm like, you know what, I'll go, you know. And so I show up at church and just really felt like, wow, God has put me here. And within a couple of months, I would begin a conversation with the pastor. And he kind of takes me, you know, to a men's breakfast with him. I hang with him. And for the first time in my life, I was sitting with him and he was praying. And while he was praying, I felt the presence of God in like a powerful way. I felt like God is here in this car with us, and I'm scared because I just want to hop out. So I'm not going to hop out because I know it's God, but I don't know what to do.
It was a whole new experience.
It was a whole new experience. I never felt anything like that. And I'm like, this man is a real man of God. And from then on, I would just spend a lot of time with him. I would, he would, just kind of mentor me and help me learn. So God gave me a man who, and somebody who I would journey with. And there was another pastor at that same church, an assistant pastor, who also I would kind of spend a lot of time with, who helped me just unpack all the promiscuity of my life in those few years.
Yeah.
And you just really prepared me for marriage. And so God did what I had needed, that I was trying to do on my own in that season of my life when I lost everything.
Wow. And so in that season right there, I'm assuming there was now a clear, more defined understanding developing of what it meant to follow Jesus. And as you say, you're unpacking your promiscuity. Like, that's where you're kind of turning the corner and like, okay, I'm putting that behind me and I'm looking at a new path.
Absolutely.
And during that season, were you still pursuing a career in music production, or were you like, walk me through now, where do you seeing your outlook in the next year or two in that season?
Yeah, it was really like a fascinating journey, because when I moved to New York, not only did I have all these verbal confirmations for like $30,000 and all that stuff, I had also just gotten a new manager. And this new manager, she only had like one other client. Her other client was like blowing up. He had did the record for a big Lloyd Banks record, On Fire, and so she was taking meetings with Janet Jackson. She was taking meetings with, Steve Rifkin. I sat in the office with, so prior to that, I had very little access. I had been in a couple of different rooms, but at that point in time, my access to have my music played for different artists and things had like dramatically increased exponentially.
Right.
But I made the least amount of money. I was making no money from it, and so God was just like, yeah, here's what you could have had. And no, you're not going to get it.
Right. That well is dried up.
The well had dried up. And so when I got evicted from my apartment, I was just like, no, God, if you don't want me to do music anymore, I don't have to. And I tell a testimony on my YouTube channel where, God had really just kind of ripped it away from me. And I never lost the passion for it, but I gave up the pursuit. I stopped chasing the dollars. I stopped chasing the fame. I stopped chasing the women. And God had really, because the thing that was the key factor in it all is, for the first time in my life, and I say this to anybody who may be listening, if you're going to follow Jesus, you need accountability. Like, there's no way that the devil is going to have a field day with you if you're not going to open your life up to somebody else to where they know what you do.
Come on.
Good or bad.
That is a word for the church specifically right now in this season, especially as we go more and more digital, that there's a danger in there that people turn church into just this thing that they press play on and then they press stop on, and they forget about church actually as a people. There's a community, and that community is not just something that you can show up to, get what you need and leave, but it's like it's a family that involves some accountability and some training up and leaning in with love and being corrected and forgiving and repenting and all of that stuff that you can't do when you just press play on a video, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it literally changed my life.
Yeah.
It literally, God literally was able to, it started moving me and he healed me from the promiscuity. Like something that I struggled with for after having my son for all those years. I think it was being like the next maybe 6-7 years. I just go down this path. I was doing some risky stuff too. And he completely healed me from that. I remember the turning point. There was this one day where I went over to this woman's house. I engaged in sexual activity with her. And later that afternoon, I'm crossing the street. And, I'm running across the street in New York City to catch the city bus. And as I'm running across the street, this pain shoots through my back. It almost like cripples me, like, or knocks me down. And I didn't, I was able to keep my footing, but it just shot through my back and it wouldn't go away. And I was on my way to Bible study. I'm on my way to Bible study. So I get to Bible study, barely walking, and all I could do was lay on the floor. Right. And everybody's like, hey, you okay? You okay? And so after Bible study, I make it through, and I'm a deacon at this time. I make it through Bible study, and my pastor takes me home. It's the same pastor, same guy who I first met, where I felt the presence of God in a real way. He drives me home, and I felt the Lord telling me, tell him what you did today. And I'm like, oh man, this is so embarrassing. And so right before I get out the car, the Lord's like, tell him. And I'm like, I don't want to get out of this car, just run into my apartment. He's like, tell him. And I'm like, okay, I got something to tell you. And I'm like, you're going to be really upset with me. I'm really embarrassed, but I've been having sex with this woman. And the response that I was expecting to get from him was like, what? Because I'm a deacon.
Right.
I just became a deacon. I'm a young deacon. And so I'm expecting him to just be like disappointed and this is going to ruin our relationship. And, because that's what I remember from my parents, and that's what I remember. You do something bad, you get chastised. If you do something bad, and it was the most loving response. I remember him. I knew it hurt, right? And I just remember him. He sighed. He said, "Oh man," and I remember he like put his his hand on my shoulder, and he was like, "It's gonna be okay." He's like, "It's gonna be okay." He's like, "Thanks for telling me." It was just like but I'm like, that's it? Right. Hold on, I ain't in trouble. Now, mind you, things had to happen, and I had to kind of put the deacon role on pause, and but it was a loving process. It wasn't this punitive finger wagging. Yeah, it wasn't, and it really showed me the character of God, right? Because we read the story of the prodigal son, and the younger brother, he goes away and he comes back, and the father's waiting for him, right? And the father celebrates his return. Yeah. And it's kind of like when we have those moments where we confess our sin, when we have those moments where we're, surrendering ourselves, when we have those moments where we're allowing the accountability that God put in our life to have its way, like it's like the celebration, not this, doghouse experience that we think we're gonna have. And so that moment, literally, that was the last time that I would step out.
Wow. Look at God.
God said, there's a scripture in James, I believe it's in James. It says, confess your sins to one another that you may be healed. Yep. And we think, if I hide my sin, I'll be better. Right. He says, no. Share. Jesus is the light. He says, bring the light to the darkness, and your life will have light in it. You know what I mean? It's like, bring it out, expose it, and I will heal you. Come on. And so it was a healing time for me. And I mean, it's what allowed me to be able to be ready to be a husband. It's what allowed me to be able to bear more kids and be a dad that's faithful to my wife. And listen, I'm not going to, I'm not naive. The enemy's waiting for me to take some kind of bait, right? Yep. He's waiting, he wants to destroy all this too. Yep. But thank God I still have, Michael Faulkner, that's his name. Michael Faulkner is still in my life. I can call him right now, 4 a.m. And if he hears that phone ring, he's going to pick it up. I can be like, hey bro, I'm struggling. And that's the beauty of what you were saying. You were preaching for a second there too. You go to church. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. That is so amazing, man. Gosh, I'm feeling like right now, the presence of the Lord through your testimony, man. I got two other important questions before we wrap. And I know they're going to be long answers. So one of them is, in meeting your wife. Now, I don't want you to have to retell the whole thing, because I heard on your podcast, some of you guys' story, and the podcast is really great. Have you guys restarted it again recently, or are you?
So we did the audio version a year ago, and back in October 2021, we started the YouTube version, and so very similar to the audio, but we're on camera, and so we're on episode 3. I'm actually editing episode 4 today, so hopefully, Lord willing, by the end of today, that'll be up, because it's overdue. But we've been doing one a month, and the response to it has been amazing. Like the first 3 episodes have gotten thousands of views, and it just kind of keeps growing every day. Like the third one has more views than the second one, and they both are like almost at 3,000. And and the first one is like at 5. So I'm blown away by how just and so I call myself a YouTuber now, because really that's the reality of what's happening.
Yeah.
But I'm blown away that God could use like the simple stories and if you listen to our podcast, it's on the God and Gotham channel, and it's called the Love in the Middle Show. If you listen to it and you kind of watch us, you're not going to hear like this, amazing testimony of, oh, wow, like, all the beautiful things and how perfect it was when we saw each other. You're going to hear about how messed up and how broken we were.
Yeah.
How silly and how much of a jerk I was, how clueless I was when I met my wife, and even discerning whether or not I should marry her. Like, you're going to see just this broken path that leads to this, to this glorious, or God glorifying marriage.
Yeah.
That, where we struggled for years. We're 12 years married now, going on 13 this year. But those first few years were a complete struggle, and because it was a continuous process of God continuing now to heal both of us individually and collectively. And so I forgot the question you just asked.
You know what, though? Actually, I'm feeling like what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link to your channel and maybe to the first of those 3 episodes, so that way people can maybe go there and get more of the story about you guys' family and how you guys started. And I think maybe I'll spend the rest of this time with the little bit we have left hearing more about your journey in spiritual leadership. So you guys check out the link. If you're watching it on YouTube, it'll be above and also in the description, as well as in the podcast description. But Laban, why don't you let everybody know a little bit about when that season was? Because you've talked about now how you were part of this church. You said it was a New Horizon church, right?
Yes.
And then you became the lead pastor, and like how does that happen? What was that like, being called into pastoring, like lead pastoring? Like, you go from a deacon who's like, had to step down for a minute because of promiscuity, and now the Lord is calling you into lead pastoral position. What was that like?
Yeah, it's so funny because there's nothing inside of me that was ever like, I want to be a pastor.
Right.
Like, that never happened. That was never a thought. That was never a desire. But I do remember one day, and my brother and I laugh about this. I have a younger brother. He's 4 years younger than me. And he and I laugh about this to this day. But in my grandmother's latter years before she passed, she was living in our house, and I was a senior in high school at the time. And my brother and I were like walking through the living room together. We're about to go outside and play basketball or something. And my grandmother's sitting in this rocking chair that she would always sit in like all day long. And she stops us, like, like just while we're going. And she just like looks at us. She's like, "Now one of you is going to be a pastor."
And were you both thinking, it must be you?
Right? It must be you, because it ain't me, right? And so we laughed because he's like, she was right,
Oh,
and,
wow.
And so, so it was something that God had been doing.
Yeah.
It was nowhere in my trajectory to my knowledge. Mm-hmm. And long story short, I just kept showing up.
Mm-hmm.
So when I found that church in New York City, and, I just, they had Bible, because I wasn't working. I was looking for a job. I couldn't even get hired with my degree. Like, I was trying to get jobs at like Dunkin' Donuts. And
you're like, I got a degree in electrical engineering from Purdue.
I couldn't even get like a simple part-time job.
Wow.
And it's really because God had a path that was carved out for me. So he closed every other door. And the only door that opened was at my son's daycare, because I had so much time on my hands and I wasn't doing music during the day anymore. I would just go to the daycare class and help out. And the substitute, they had like a long-term sub. She was like, "Hey, I'm leaving. You looking for a job? You might as well take my job. You're good with the kids." Never worked with kids a day in my life other than in that class.
Right.
So then I get this part-time job there, which then, at the, a couple months into that, I had a buddy of mine at the church who's like, "Hey, you're working with kids. You should, there's hiring in the summer camp." So I go work at the summer camp, and I go to the summer camp to teach rap and hip hop to kids.
Nice.
At the end of the summer camp, one of the counselors is like, hey, anybody want a job, during the school year? We're hiring at this other company I work for. I get hired there. So this God only would just open the doors that he wanted me to walk through.
Come on.
But in my spare time, I gave it all to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
The doors of the church were open. I just showed up, even when I didn't want to be there. There was Bible study at 12 noon and 6 p.m. And I'm not saying this because I was some kind of super Christian. What I'm saying is I was so messed up at the time, I didn't know where else to go.
Yeah.
So I just kept showing up. And the little did I know that, I would show up at this 12 Bible study at 12 noon every Tuesday or Wednesday, and he was teaching from Portable Seminary.
Okay.
Like, years later, I would get this big book called Portable Seminary, and I'm like, oh my goodness.
This is everything you went through.
This is all the stuff from the Bible study. Like, he was literally, teaching, like it was a seminary course that I was going to.
Wow.
That wasn't a seminary course. It was called a Bible study. And so God had been preparing me from day one of me just showing up. And so, then they would have these all-night prayers. I just show up. I drag my son. He sleep on the pew. And like I said, I wasn't some super Christian. I just had nothing else to do with my time. I didn't know anything better because everything I was trying to do fell apart.
Yeah.
And so Michael Faulkner, he would leave that church that he was pastoring. That was a little bit of a larger church to plant a church in Harlem that was New Horizon Church. And he invited me to come. It was an awkward experience because we started this church in a bowling alley, And
hey man, Jesus is everywhere.
Jesus is everywhere. And he knew that I had worked with music, so he asked me to be the sound guy. And so I just started out just by being faithful doing sound. And then he knew that I could do websites, and so I would do the websites. And then he knew that I was a good writer, so I would write letters. And so I would start working like part-time for the church in his basement. And I just think God would just naturally just progress me. I eventually became a deacon, then got sat down as a deacon, and then, got restored as a deacon. And over time, and then maybe about 7 years into that journey, he had asked me to be his assistant pastor. I kind of stepped into that blindly, not knowing. And all the while, my wife is looking like, oh, you're going to be a pastor. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm like, I don't
she was saying that to you before?
She was, because she's like, I didn't sign up for this. I did not sign up to be a pastor's wife. And
man, I swear there's too many similarities in our story. I'm just going to say that because those were literally the exact words my wife told me when I told her I was going to seminary. She goes, no, you're not, because I'm not going to be a pastor's wife. And the Lord had his own journey. But anyways, this is your story. Continue.
No, that's amazing. That's amazing. I think that even God connecting us and then us realizing we have a mutual friend, like that.
Yeah. Steve Wallace. Shout out to Steve.
Shout out to Steve Wallace. That man, God is doing some amazing things in his life. But if you could put a link to his stuff in here.
Yeah, absolutely, man. No, let's link it up. Actually, I have, I don't know if this is his first album, but it was the first album I ever heard about him I think it was right after high school or maybe during high school. He did this album, Come With The Real. And I remember I had the physical copy, and it's like got the cartoon cover. So we're going to give him a link. And he just recently did Hal, which was like a hip opera. I don't know what you would describe a version of
musical,
musical. There you go. Yeah, so we'll link up to his stuff on here too, man. Got generous love all over. Come on. So continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So my wife is just, she sees this thing happening, and I'm like, babe, that's not what's happening. Like, there's no part of me that wants to be a pastor. I'm not gonna be a pastor. And sure enough, God was just slowly but surely, but he did it in a timing that was real. And I remember a year before I was installed as the lead pastor at New Horizon, God had called me to leave my job. So eventually, after that summer camp, I worked at a company that was a community-based organization. And so I worked part-time there for 5 years. And in the next 5 years, I became a part of their full-time staff. So I'm kind of living like a pretty comfortable life.
Okay.
And we just had another baby, our youngest son now that's out of the womb. And God calls me to leave that job. But I'm like, in my head, I'm like, God, I'll go. But my wife is not down with this.
Right. You gotta get her.
The only way I'm gonna go, God, is she's on board.
Right.
You made us one. You put us together.
Yep.
And so I pray that, and I go home and I tell my wife, babe, I think God's calling me to leave my job. And I'm expecting her to be like, what? You know, to go to do ministry full time? What? Absolutely. I'm expecting this like anger,
right,
and frustration. And all she said was, well, you know the voice of God. So if you feel like God's telling you, you got to go.
Come on,
like,
man. You're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? This is so awesome. But
that was my out.
Right.
I'm like, there's no way I'm gonna be a
sure
pastor.
You were gonna say no.
I'm like, there's no way this is happening, God. I'm like, good luck with this one, God.
He's like, I don't need luck.
And sure enough, I would leave my job 2 weeks later and go into full-time ministry. At the time, I was assistant pastor. I was getting like a small stipend every month, about $1,000. And by the end of that month, that money dried up. And so my income within a month of leaving my full-time job went to zero.
Wow.
And it was just crazy, but it was so amazing because in that season, God kind of used the season when I first moved to New York and I was evicted to prepare me for that season. And so in that season, I was able to remain calm. In that season, I was able to continue leading my family, leading my wife, leading my kids without panicking. In that season, because I had been through it before.
Man, you preaching.
God,
you preaching now.
God, but listen, bro, God was so faithful. We never, now, if I could do it again, in retrospect, we would have changed things budget-wise in our family and downsized things. We never did any of that. We only missed one car payment that we made by the end of the next month. Everything else remained constant. God got us through. Amen. We never went broke. We never got evicted. We never lost it. My kids, unless we told them that was what was happening, which we didn't tell them, they did not know.
Wow.
They had no clue that we were financially struggling. And that's the power. But here's the thing. It was because God calls me. I have a pastor friend of mine who says, he's like a mentor, and he says, if it's God's will, it's God's bill.
Oh, there you go. I like that.
If God calls you to do something, he always shows up with the provision, even if you can't see it. All you have to do is go. And so me going, God just guided us through that season. And we had just taken out a car lease, like a few months before I left my job, a brand new car lease. And God just got us through. And so, and then within a year, I had been examined by the elders of our fellowship of churches and got installed as lead pastor. Michael Faulkner had handed and passed the church on to me and transitioned me in to be the lead pastor of New Horizon Church. And God had given me a vision. And, months prior to that, he had told me like, hey, God's not giving me any more vision for the church. So since, you're going to be taking over in a few months, you're going to have to pray for vision. And I'm like, what the heck does that mean? What are you talking about? And so I remember praying, right? I remember like sitting down and, okay, God, here we go. I'm supposed to pray for vision. I have no clue what I'm doing. So you're going to have to show me something. And I remember the Holy Spirit saying, get a pen. I'm like, okay, I'll take out my phone. I'll put it in my phone. He's like, no, it's going to be too much for you to put in your phone. You're not going to be able to keep up. I'm like, oh, okay. I get a pen and paper. And within the next 30, I don't even know how long I was praying, God just started speaking and just giving me vision, telling me the people who are going to come along. And here's the crazy part. I have that piece of paper to this day. There's people whose names are on there who are part of New Horizon who aren't part of our church right now. I'm like, I don't know how God's going to do this.
Right.
But I'm believing that they're going to be back.
Come on.
I
love it. I love it, man.
Yeah, it's so amazing how God just kind of moves. And so I took over the leadership of the church, and it was hard. That first year, it was hard because it was still New Horizon Church. And I had the vision for New Generation Church. I even had the name. I hadn't shared it with anybody, I don't think, not even my wife yet. But I'm leading a church that I had inherited, and I'm coming in like, okay, I'm gonna come hit the ground running, and I had all these plans and all these things I'm gonna do. Within like the first 6 months, I was completely burnt out, and I was just crying to God, like, God, I can't do this.
Right.
God, I need help, because I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I could watch what was happening, and I could do that better. He's doing it wrong, and just all these things you're thinking.
The lack of humility that so
Right.
many of us walk into these, and I say us, like, they walk into these new things with, like, that's like the first thing that the Lord is like, so we're gonna have to stamp that out of you. Like, okay, you need a little bit of humility, brother.
Yeah, and it was an amazing season though, because he had while I struggled, God also provide provision. He also helped me get grounded, and I got connected with an organization called Redeemer City to City that was started by many people know Tim Keller.
Tim Keller, yeah, I was about to say I know that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I got connected with one of their incubator programs, and a group of pastors who we would meet once a month, and God will just break us all down in this class and just rooted us in the gospel. Because what happens when you become a pastor, and what happened for me was that you have this idea of what that is,
Right. Yeah.
and that idea comes from everything you've seen every other pastor do.
Yeah.
And so you get up to preach on Sundays. And every Sunday, I remember I would go to preach, and I'm thinking, man, I hope this sermon is I hope I knock this out of the park, right?
Right.
So all Saturday night, you're like, like lamenting, and you're like, just
to be
praying,
great.
that I have this amazing sermon, and then all Monday morning, you're looking back about how much better you could have done.
Right.
Yeah. And then so I was depressed like every Monday. And it was in that incubator class where God helped me to see that, I love you, son. You're my son with whom I'm well pleased, whether you preach a great sermon or whether you preach your worst sermon. And it's because it's not about how good you can preach. It's about because you have faith in Jesus.
Yeah.
I love you, and I'm pleased with you because of your faith, not because of your performance.
Yeah.
And it was a 3-year journey that kind of just, I'm at the end, like I'm finally receiving and walking in that now, where I don't wake up on Sundays to perform a sermon. I don't wake up on Sundays thinking of how good is this going to be, but it was years of depression. It was years of burnout. It was years of when people left feeling the pain of, they left because of me.
Right.
Not realizing that, no, God, there's a part in the Bible where Jesus talks about how he prunes things that are fruitful to make them more fruitful. Like people are going to leave, but it's not always because of a bad job you did. Yeah, maybe there are things in your leadership where you can get better.
Yeah.
But everything is not about you, Laban.
Right. You are not the center of all things. Imagine that. Well, take us a little bit, not to fast forward everything, but like take us a little bit as we wrap up to now. So you were operating in New Horizon, and then I know you from your current pastoral role. Take us a little bit about from the what was inspiring the transition and what brought you to where you are today in New Generation.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that God is God is so amazing, because he'll show you something that is like, because I remember so I prayed and I write all the stuff down, this vision God is showing me, and it was New Generation. And I remember and I'm thinking, God, how are we gonna ever get here? Like, we are nowhere near this. And so I was praying, and when I hit that, after being lead pastor for 6 months, when I hit that point of burnout where I just couldn't do it anymore, one of my good friends had heard me share the vision for where we were going on that Sunday when I got installed at lead pastor, and he was like, "Oh man, he and his wife, they had joined the church," and then, this was the straw that broke the camel's back, where that 6 month point they had left the church already. And it was just like the most painful thing for me.
Mm.
And so I just started to cry out to God, like, God, I have no clue what I'm doing.
Mm.
God, I need some help. God, send me some help. And day in and day out, I just cried out to God for help. I mean, for like months. I mean, months of just crying out to God. I need help. God, I need help. God, send some help. God, send some help. And he would put just a couple people in my life. And I got in connection with another organization called Assist Church Expansion. They're a church planting and church restarting organization. And I partnered with one of the leader there, Nathan Bryant. And he just really kind of came in my life at a pivotal moment where he was the help that God sent. And he just really, kind of coached me through, put a team together. And so I put a vision team together and I shared hey, this is what I casted the vision on that first Sunday. And then I shared with this team, hey, this is where we're going. You guys are going to help me, because I told the church, like, hey, we're going to put this team together. Pray and see if God wants you on this team. And so we had a team of like 5 or 6 of us. And we just met every Sunday after church, just working on the wording of the vision. And Nathan Bryant, he coached me through this process. And it was just very instrumental in helping me as a leader bring to life what God had put inside of me. And so through that process, we finally came to a point where we were like, okay, when are we going to pull the trigger, of telling the church like, hey, this is what the new church is going to look like. And we got to close this church down to get there. Right. And so it was almost about a year later from when I had first taken over, a little over a year, where we had that conversation with the church. And a month after that conversation, we had closed it down. And a month after that, we left the building that we were in. And so maybe I should kind of back up, because this was kind of where that journey started. Was we closed the church down and we told everybody in 2 weeks we're going to reopen, but we're going to reopen as New Generation Community Church launch team. Okay, so everybody's welcome, come back. Everybody came back for the most part. Right. But then the next 3 Sundays, we had pretty much seen everybody. On that 4th Sunday, we had to move out of the building that we're in because we couldn't afford it. Not there weren't enough funds coming in, and we were hemorrhaging money at the time. And so we moved out of that building and we found a location that we could rent out that was 2 blocks away, 2 blocks down the street. And so we told everybody we're taking a week off so we could move out. And 2 Sundays from now, we're going to come back again and we'll meet in that location. We showed up that Sunday. Everybody was gone.
What?
Everybody was gone.
Wow.
We had a small handful of maybe 5 people who were still there, including my family. It made us 10, right?
Right. Wow.
And it was like the most painful thing. And I remember my wife calling me on the phone because I was still outside and I hadn't gone in yet. And, there was all these things happening. She said, I just want to give you a heads up. This is what it is. And so when I walk in and I'm like, welcome to church planning, everybody.
Right.
Because I'm like, I gotta somehow like lead everybody through this experience. And even though I'm broken. Yeah. And God was just so faithful. And so he pruned us. Mm-hmm. And slowly but surely he would start to, over the next, that was 2018, July 2018, over the next few years, he would just kind of put different people in my life at different times who would kind of, give me, some wisdom and kind of help me, navigate that process of becoming New Generation. And it was hard, it was hard. It's still hard. But I'll end like this by saying once the pandemic hit, we had just started meeting on Sundays and inviting the outside, people to come. Yeah. And we had 5 Sundays of that. Then the pandemic hits and we go online. Since going online, we've stayed online. We're still online to this day. It's been my favorite season of ministry out of all these years.
Praise God. Praise God.
And the only reason why I can say that is because God showed me through the pandemic that there's another path.
Yeah. Yep.
The way you've been going at it and the way you've been looking at it and the way you've been trying to go and the way people are even coaching you to go. It's not how I'm calling you to do this.
Yeah.
And so he leads me on this journey where I'm going kind of counterculture. And this is where you come in. I'm going kind of counterculture. And I'm like, okay, God, I'm out here alone because there's nobody who can really even speak into what we're doing and how you're shaping it and what you're showing me and what this church looks like. And then he connects me with where you and I meet, the Harvest community, Plant for Harvest. And then, so you and I meet, we're going on this journey. And little did I know that this Plant for Harvest movement cohort was birthed out of Tampa Underground.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, which was a big voice into my journey and spoke into where we have been going. So
and what God was showing me. And so I finally see this documentary and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what God is showing me that we're doing. And God, once again, he sends the help.
And I'm going to do a link to that documentary as well, because that was actually really powerfully done. I think it's might be called Underground People. Yep, Underground People. Yeah. Really, really powerful stuff. And actually, one of the things that inspires me in my journey right now is I begin to produce documentaries. So that's so beautiful, man. Your story is so rich and filled with, I believe there's this common thread of faithfulness and the faithfulness of God and him calling you higher and higher into your own faithfulness. And I love even there's this theme of just keep showing up. Like you just keep showing up and God's going to do what he said he's going to do, and I've been meditating. I want to say it's Psalm 52. There's a verse in there where it says, I cry out to God Most High, the God who fulfills his purposes for me. And I feel that just encapsulates what I've been hearing in your story. Like, even when you didn't know, like you were crying out, you know what I mean? Like you were like, God, help me, God, help me, God. And he just continues to fulfill his purposes for you. And man, I thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. I know it's impacting some people as they've been watching and listening. And I wonder, as we close, are there any places that you would direct people, ways that they can get in touch with you, or any final words that you'd have?
Yeah, I would say search for me on Google, not on Google, but on YouTube. Because I think that's kind of where I'm putting, most of my energy right now is, so our initial channel is God and Gotham. So if you get to God and Gotham channel, from there, my other channels are linked there. So if you want to hear like more stories of just my personal testimony, and I share just stories of faith on another channel, on the God and Gotham channel. If you go to like the profile, you can see those channels there. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Laban Z Reeves. I used to go by the moniker LZ, which is my nickname growing up because me and my dad have the same name. Okay. So they can find me there. And I think the other thing I would just kind of like to maybe just end with is, because you said, there's this theme of just keep showing up and the theme of faith. And one of my favorite scriptures, and if people take nothing else from this conversation, I just pray that everybody would take this. The Bible says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. Yeah. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. So I can do all the good Christian things, but if I'm not walking by faith, you know what I mean? And so,
yeah. Where's a mic so you can drop it? Like,
oh, you're funny. You're too funny. Listen, that ain't for me to drop. That's
right.
That's the Lord dropping
mic. Thank you so much. Praise God for your story. Praise God for you and your family, and the fact that we've been able to connect, man. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, and thank you for having me, bro. I love what you're doing. Keep it up. I'm gonna be praying for your documentaries. I'll be praying for your podcast. I'll be praying for it all. I'm so happy that God connected us, man. You inspire me to keep going.
And you the same, my brother. Thank you so much. And you guys, I invite all of you into prayer over Laban and all of the ministry through New Generation Church and all their work that they're doing online and on the streets in New York. And with that, We're going to say goodbye. And you guys, wait, real quick, before I forget. If you haven't already, if you're just like listening to this episode as a standalone, we appreciate that. We love that you're here. But go ahead and subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast if you're listening. And if you're listening, maybe leave us a review that helps people get a sense of why it is that you appreciated this episode and this podcast. And leave us a like if you're watching it on YouTube. And we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks again, Laban.
All right, thank you.